Across the world, stone structures remain where history says they shouldn't. Platforms buried beneath deserts, pillars raised before cities existed, walls and underground works built with planning that feels far ahead of their time. These weren't random efforts. They weren't crude experiments. They were intentional. Tonight, we're looking at ancient sites that challenge the order we think civilization followed. Places that suggest knowledge, organization, and engineering appeared much earlier than we're taught. So take your time. You don't need the visuals to feel this, because when these structures are seen together, one quiet question stays with you. How much of the human story are we still missing? Karahunj. On a high volcanic plateau in southern Armenia, where the land opens wide and the sky feels unusually close, hundreds of dark stones rise from the ground. They do not form walls. They do not protect a settlement. They do not announce a city. They stand. This place is known as Karahunj, sometimes called Zoratskarer, and it is one of the most quietly unsettling prehistoric sites on Earth. Not because it overwhelms with scale, but because it refuses to explain itself. More than 200 basalt stones are arranged across the plateau. Some stand upright, others lean, softened by time and weather. Many are aligned in long chains. Others form loose arcs, and extending outward from the central cluster are what researchers often call the outer rings. Stones placed beyond the core, expanding the site into the surrounding landscape. It is these outer stones that raise the hardest questions. From a distance, Karahunj looks scattered, almost casual. But when you slow down, when you walk the lines, follow the spacing, and trace the directions, something begins to emerge. Patterns repeat. Orientations recur. Certain stones point not toward each other, but toward the horizon, and the horizon matters here. Southern Armenia is a land of long sightlines. On clear days, distant ridges and peaks define the edges of vision. Sunrise and sunset arrive cleanly, without obstruction. Seasonal changes in the sky are easy to observe, if you are patient. The builders of Karahunj were patient. Archaeological estimates place the site's origins anywhere between 5,000 and 7,500 years ago, though some researchers argue it may be even older. The debate remains unresolved. What is not debated is that Karahunj predates classical civilizations, written language in the region, and metal architecture. And yet stone was moved. Basalt blocks weighing several tons were quarried locally and transported across uneven ground. They were positioned upright, stabilized in soil, and set with enough care to remain standing for millennia in a seismically active region. This alone implies organization. But Karahunj goes further. Roughly 80 of the stones contain drilled holes near their upper edges, circular openings, smooth and consistent in diameter. These holes pass cleanly through solid basalt, one of the hardest volcanic stones available. Basalt does not fracture easily. It does not yield to crude force. Creating these holes would have required abrasion, patience, and control, likely using stone tools and sand over long periods of time. This is not a task performed casually. Each hole represents sustained effort. And the holes are not random. They are positioned at similar heights. They face similar directions. And when wind passes across the plateau, air moves through them, producing a low, whistling tone. Sound emerges from stone. Whether this acoustic effect was intentional remains debated, but its consistency suggests awareness. The builders noticed something and repeated it. The outer rings extend the mystery. These stones do not reinforce a structure. They do not enclose space efficiently. Instead, they radiate outward in lines that seem to mark direction rather than boundary. Several alignments correspond with the positions of sunrise and sunset during solstices and equinoxes. Others appear to point toward notable stars that would have been prominent thousands of years ago. To achieve this, the builders needed long-term observation. You cannot mark solstices accurately in a single year. You must watch. Correct. Remember. This means Karahunj was not built once. It was refined. Generation after generation returned to the site, adjusted placements, added stones, and preserved alignments. Knowledge here was not written, it was practiced. That kind of continuity is rare. The outer stones also suggest that Carahunj was never meant to be experienced from one fixed position. It unfolds as you move. Walk the lines, and your body becomes part of the geometry. Stop at certain stones, and the horizon aligns. Move again, and the alignment breaks. This is not architecture meant to be seen. It is architecture meant to be used. Some researchers believe Carahunj functioned as an astronomical observatory, a place where sky movements were tracked through stone alignments and sightlines. Others argue it was ceremonial, ritualistic, or symbolic, with alignments serving spiritual rather than scientific purposes. These interpretations are not mutually exclusive. In many prehistoric cultures, astronomy and ritual were inseparable. Understanding the sky meant understanding time. Understanding time meant survival, when to migrate, plant, hunt, or gather. The outer rings may have marked seasonal pathways, routes walked during specific times of year, or they may have guided sound, wind, and movement through the site in ways we no longer recognize. What Carahunj does not provide is explanation. There are no carvings of deities, no inscriptions, no figurative art, only stone and placement. And placement is a language, one we no longer speak fluently. Standing among the outer stones today, the experience is subdued. There is no dramatic reveal, no towering structure demanding awe. Instead, there is a slow realization that nothing here is accidental. The stones are too consistent, the alignments too precise, the holds too deliberate. This challenges a common assumption, that prehistoric people were reactive rather than conceptual. Carahunj suggests the opposite. It implies abstraction, planning, a desire to encode knowledge into landscape itself, not to dominate it, but to understand it. In a series exploring prehistoric structures discovered beyond modern expectations, Carahunj belongs at the beginning because it represents something foundational, the moment when humans stopped merely living within nature and began mapping their relationship to it. Stone became memory, alignment became instruction, the sky became reference, and the outer rings expanded that reference outward, linking Earth to horizon, horizon to sky. Carahunj does not tell us what its builders believed. It tells us how they thought, slowly, collectively, over long stretches of time. That way of thinking feels distant today, and yet the stones still stand, waiting, aligned, patient, not demanding answers, only attention. Sambor Prey Cook. Deep in the forests of central Cambodia, far from the monumental stone temples most people associate with ancient Southeast Asia, lies a much older experiment in architecture. The jungle here is dense. Roots twist through brick. Trees grow where sanctuaries once stood. And beneath it all, holding everything together, are foundations that quietly change the course of history. This is Sambor Prey Cook. Long before Angkor rose into stone towers and reservoirs, this place was already solving problems of scale, stability, and sacred space. Sambor Prey Cook was the capital of Vishanapura, center of the Chinla kingdom, active as early as the 6th century CE, centuries before Angkor Wat. But what makes Sambor Prey Cook extraordinary is not its height or ornamentation. It is its foundations. More than 100 temples are scattered across this forested landscape. Many are built of brick rather than stone, an unusual choice for monumental construction. Brick erodes, brick cracks, brick absorbs water, and yet these temples endured. They endured because the builders understood something fundamental. In a tropical environment, permanence does not come from walls. It comes from what lies beneath them. The foundations at Sambor Prey Cook are carefully engineered stone platforms, often square or octagonal, raised slightly above ground level. These platforms separate sacred structures from soil moisture, flooding, and root intrusion. Even today, when upper walls have collapsed, the foundations remain intact and readable. This was not trial and error. It was design. The platforms were built using laterite and sandstone, materials chosen for drainage and compression strength. Layers were compacted deliberately. Weight was distributed evenly. Corners were reinforced, especially in the unusual octagonal temples, a form almost unheard of at the time. Octagons are difficult. They require precise angles and symmetry. Errors compound quickly, and yet, multiple octagonal foundations exist here, all consistent in proportion. This implies standardized knowledge, builders trained to replicate complex geometry accurately. This alone challenges a common assumption, that early Southeast Asian architecture evolved slowly and primitively. At Sambor Praekuk, experimentation was already advanced. The site is also notable for its layout. Temples are not placed randomly. They are organized into clusters, aligned with cardinal directions, and separated by open spaces that suggest ceremonial movement rather than dense urban habitation. This was a ritual landscape. Foundations defined where people walked, gathered, and focused attention. Sacred space was structured long before walls rose above it. In many cases, later cultures reused these exact platforms, rebuilding sanctuaries atop the same bases. Why? Because the foundations worked. They resisted flooding during monsoon seasons. They stabilized brick superstructures in soft soil. They preserved alignment across centuries. Even when belief systems changed, the underlying engineering remained valid. This reuse revealed something important. The builders of Angkor did not invent monumental architecture from nothing. They inherited it, refined it, scaled it. Sambor Praekuk was the prototype. One of the most intriguing aspects of these foundations is their relationship with water. Cambodia's climate is defined by extremes. Intense rain followed by long dry periods. The platforms subtly manage runoff, channeling water away from temple cores without visible drains. This passive water management is easy to overlook, but critical. Modern structures fail here precisely because they ignore it. Ancient builders did not. The foundations also reveal symbolic intent. Raising temples above ground created a separation between the human world and the sacred. That elevation did not need to be dramatic. Even a meter mattered. It changed perspective. It marked transition. Step up, and you entered another realm. This conceptual thinking, embedding belief into engineering, is one of Sambor Praekuk's most important contributions. It shows that early Khmer builders were not only copying Indian religious ideas, but adapting them to local conditions with originality and precision. Brick sanctuaries rose. Stone foundations anchored them. Meaning flowed through both. Over time, the jungle reclaimed the site. Brick cracked. Roofs collapsed. Trees grew directly out of temple walls. But the foundations persisted, holding outlines, proportions, and alignments long after everything else faded. Standing among them today, the experience is quiet. There are no crowds, no towering spires, just low platforms emerging from forest floor, telling a story that requires patience to hear. In a series exploring prehistoric and early historic structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Sambor Praekuk belongs near the beginning because it reveals how advanced civilizations actually form, not through sudden leaps, but through foundations, literal and conceptual. So, before empires rise, systems are tested. Before monuments dominate skylines, platforms quietly solve problems. Before history remembers names, engineers make decisions that last. Sambor Praekuk reminds us that greatness does not begin with spectacle. It begins with understanding the ground. Hirbet Keyafa. On a hill overlooking the Ela Valley in modern Israel, a stone-built city once stood for only a short time, and then vanished. No gradual decay. No centuries of rebuilding. Just a brief moment of occupation, frozen in stone. This is Khirbet Keyafa. From a distance, the site appears unremarkable. Low ruins, broken walls, a plateau shaped by time and weather. But as archaeologists began to excavate, a startling reality emerged. This was not a village. It was a fully planned fortified city, and it appeared almost overnight. Khirbet Keyafa dates to the early Iron Age, around the late 11th to early 10th century BCE. a period traditionally described as unstable, decentralized, and technologically limited. According to long-standing narratives, this was a time before true urban planning in the region. The walls of Khirbet Kayaffa say otherwise. Encircling the site is a massive casemate wall system, two parallel stone walls connected by cross walls, forming enclosed chambers. This design is not primitive. It is sophisticated military engineering, optimized for strength, flexibility, and resource efficiency. Casemate walls serve multiple purposes. They absorb impact. They allow rapid reinforcement. They double as storage or living space in times of peace. And they can be filled with earth during siege to create a solid defensive barrier. This system requires foresight. The stones used to build these walls were not small. Many weigh hundreds of kilograms. They were quarried, transported uphill, and set with remarkable precision. Courses are consistent. Corners are reinforced. Gateways are integrated seamlessly into the defensive circuit. Most striking of all, the city has two gates. In ancient fortified settlements, a single gate was the norm. Gates are vulnerabilities. They require guards, planning, and control. Khirbet Kayaffa deliberately incorporated two opposing gates into its design, one facing west toward the coastal plains and one facing south toward the valley below. This was not accidental. The gates align with roads and sightlines. They suggest regulated movement, controlled access, and a clear understanding of the surrounding landscape. Whoever built this city knew exactly what they were defending, and from whom. Inside the walls, the planning continues. Houses were built directly into the casemate chambers, forming a ring of dwellings integrated into the fortifications themselves. Streets follow consistent paths. Drainage is considered. Space is allocated deliberately. This is urban planning. And it appears suddenly, without obvious local precedent. There are no earlier developmental stages at the site. No experimental walls. No gradual expansion. Khirbet Kayaffa was built quickly, used briefly, and abandoned. This creates a profound problem for traditional timelines, because building a city like this requires more than stone and labor. It requires institutional knowledge, standardized methods, trained builders, and centralized coordination. Someone had done this before, or learned it somewhere else. The walls also show an understanding of topography. The city's perimeter follows the natural contours of the hill, maximizing defensive advantage while minimizing construction effort. Steep slopes are reinforced where needed. Natural drop-offs are incorporated into the defensive logic. This is not trial and error construction. It is applied engineering. Perhaps most intriguing is what Khirbet Kayaffa does not contain. There are no pig bones, a detail that sets it apart from neighboring sites of the same period. There are no cultic figurines, no clear temples. This suggests a distinct cultural identity, one that prioritized administration and defense over monumental religious display. The city's short lifespan only deepens the mystery. Radiocarbon dating suggests it was occupied for just a few decades, possibly a single generation. Then it was abandoned, not destroyed violently, but left behind. Why build something so advanced only to walk away? Some scholars associate Khirbet Kayaffa with early state formation in the region, a centralized authority experimenting with urban control during a volatile time. Others see it as an outpost, guarding strategic trade routes through the valley. Whatever its purpose, the walls remain the strongest evidence. They tell us that early Iron Age societies here were capable of coordinated large-scale construction far earlier than previously assumed. They understood defense, logistics, and urban integration at a level that does not align with the idea of loosely organized tribal settlements. In a series exploring prehistoric and early historic structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Khirbet Kayaffa is essential because it exposes a flaw in how history is often written. We assume complexity appears slowly. We expect experimentation before mastery. Khirbet Kayaffa shows mastery without visible experimentation. It suggests that knowledge can exist before evidence of its gradual development, passed orally, transferred culturally, or executed by specialists whose work left few traces beyond stone. Standing among the walls today, the city feels compact, efficient, and intentional. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is decorative. Every stone has a role. This was not a place meant to endure for centuries. It was meant to function immediately, and when its purpose ended, it was left behind, leaving us with a rare snapshot of early urban intelligence, preserved precisely because it was never reused. The walls of Khirbet Qeiyafa do not argue. They do not exaggerate. They simply stand, quietly insisting that the past was far more capable, organized, and intentional than we are often prepared to admit. El Fuerte de Samaipata. High on the eastern edge of the Andes, where mountains begin to soften into forest and cloud drifts slowly across stone, there is a place that defies easy classification. It is not a fortress in the military sense. It is not a city. It is not a temple built upward into walls and towers. Instead, it is a mountain that was carved. This is El Fuerte de Samaipata. At the heart of the site lies a massive sandstone outcrop, more than 200 meters long, sculpted directly into the bedrock. The surface is etched with channels, steps, niches, animal figures, geometric forms, and symbolic shapes that flow across the stone as if the mountain itself were a canvas. This is not construction placed on land. This is land transformed into structure. And that distinction matters. Samaipata sits at a crossroads, geographically and culturally. It lies between the high Andes and the Amazonian lowlands, between civilizations that built in stone and cultures that, felines, birds, carved in shallow relief. These figures are not isolated. They interact with channels, steps, and niches, implying layered meaning rather than symbolic isolation. The mountain was not carved randomly. It was organized. One of the most striking aspects of Samaipata is what it lacks. There are no large standing walls at the core, no enclosed sanctuaries rising above ground. Instead, the sacred space is horizontal, spread across the rock's surface. This challenges a common assumption that monumental architecture must rise. Here, monumentality spreads. The precision of the carvings raises immediate questions about tools and methods. To maintain consistent depth and smoothness across such a large surface, carvers had to control pressure and angle continuously. Errors could not be hidden. The stone does not forgive. Yet the surface remains coherent. This implies specialized labor. People trained not just to carve, but to plan sequences of carving across months or years. Sections had to be completed in order. Channels had to align. Figures had to integrate with existing cuts. This is choreography in stone. Later cultures recognized the power of this place. The Inca incorporated Samaipata into their system, adding structures nearby but leaving the carved rock largely untouched. They did not override it. They adapted around it. That choice is revealing. The Inca were master builders. When they encountered inferior structures, they replaced them. When they encountered something they respected, they preserved it. Samaipata fell into the second category. The site also resists simple religious interpretation. It does not conform neatly to known Andean temple layouts. It does not replicate Inca or Tiwanaku forms exactly. Instead, it feels older, experimental, rooted in a worldview that blended landscape, water, and symbolism into a single ritual system. Some researchers believe Samaipata functioned as a ceremonial center tied to seasonal cycles, rainfall, and agricultural fertility. Others suggest astronomical alignments embedded in the carving orientation. Still others see it as a boundary marker, a sacred threshold between worlds. These interpretations differ, but they agree on one thing. This was not casual carving. The decision to carve a living mountain rather than build upon it reflects a different relationship with stone. Instead of extracting blocks, the builders shaped what already existed. Instead of imposing form, they revealed it. This philosophy is rare. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, El Fuerte de Samaipata stands out because it represents a different kind of engineering. Not mechanical, not vertical, but integrative. Engineering that works with rainfall, with gravity, with erosion. engineering that accepts time as a collaborator rather than an enemy. Standing on the carved rock today, the experience is quiet and unsettling. There are no clear instructions on where to stand or what to see. Meaning does not present itself immediately. You have to move, to wait, to imagine water flowing where the stone is dry. Only then does the site begin to speak. Samaipata reminds us that some of the most advanced ancient knowledge was not encoded in texts or towers, but carved directly into the land itself. Knowledge meant to be felt underfoot, to disappear and return with the rain, to resist explanation but endure. And that endurance, quiet, massive, and unfinished, is what makes El Fuerte de Samaipata one of the most difficult prehistoric sites in the world to ignore. Castelo Velho de Freixo de Numão. On a high ridge overlooking the Douro Valley in northern Portugal, a set of stone walls traces the outline of something that refuses to be defined. It is not a castle in the medieval sense. It is not a town. It is not a fort built for prolonged warfare. And yet, it was built deliberately, stone by stone, on one of the most commanding viewpoints in the region. This place is often called Castelejo, more formally known as Castelo Velho de Freixo de Numão. From a distance, the site feels minimal. Low stone walls curve gently along the ridge. They do not rise high. They do not enclose space tightly, but as you walk the perimeter, a deeper logic begins to reveal itself. These walls were never meant to stop an army. They were meant to define a place. The enclosure dates back to the late Neolithic and Chalcolithic periods, roughly between 3000 and 2000 BCE, a time when metal was just beginning to appear and most societies in Iberia were still small, mobile, and non-urban. According to older models of history, communities of this era should not be building large stone enclosures on hilltops. But Castelejo exists. The walls are constructed from locally sourced stone, carefully stacked without mortar. The stones vary in size, but their placement is intentional. Courses follow the natural contour of the ridge, creating a boundary that feels organic rather than imposed. This is not crude piling. It is controlled placement. What makes the walls especially intriguing is their interrupted geometry. Openings appear where walls could have been continuous. Narrow passages guide movement inward. The enclosure is permeable, inviting entry rather than denying it. This is a crucial clue. Defensive walls seek to close space. These walls choreograph it. Inside the enclosure, there is little evidence of permanent habitation. No dense clusters of homes. No storage pits suggesting long-term residence. Instead, the interior feels open, prepared, but not occupied. This suggests a different purpose. Castelejo appears to have functioned as a ceremonial or gathering enclosure, a place people returned to periodically rather than lived within continuously. The walls marked a threshold, a transition from ordinary landscape into structured space. Elevation played a key role. From the ridge, the valley unfolds in every direction. Movement across the landscape is visible for kilometers. Sunlight changes dramatically across the day. Wind moves freely. Sound carries. This is a place of awareness. The builders understood that location is as important as construction. By placing the enclosure here, they amplified visibility, symbolism, and presence without needing monumental height. The walls also show evidence of phased construction. They were not built all at once. Sections were added, modified, and sometimes partially dismantled over time. This suggests that the site's meaning evolved. Each generation interacted with what came before. That continuity matters. It implies memory embedded in stone, decisions respected long after the original builders were gone. People did not erase the enclosure. They adapted it. One of the most striking aspects of Castelejo is what archaeologists found, and did not find, within the walls. Artifacts are sparse but symbolic. Carefully placed stones. Deposits arranged intentionally. Objects that seem more ceremonial than domestic. This pattern aligns with ritual behavior. In many prehistoric cultures, stone enclosures served as places of assembly, negotiation, seasonal gathering, or rites tied to agricultural cycles. They were not everyday spaces. They were special spaces. The walls did not protect people from danger. They separated time. Crossing into the enclosure likely marked a shift in behavior, expectation, and meaning. You entered not a village, but a moment. The engineering behind the walls reinforces this idea. They are strong enough to endure centuries of exposure, yet modest enough to blend into the ridge. Their strength lies in continuity, not dominance. This restraint is important. Castillejo does not announce power. It suggests coordination. Building walls like these requires agreement. Labor must be organized. Stone must be gathered and placed consistently. But there is no sign of coercion or hierarchy imposed through architecture. This points to collective construction. A community choosing to invest effort into defining shared space rather than private ownership. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Castillejo megalithic walls challenge a deeply rooted assumption that early complexity must express itself through cities, fortresses, or monuments. Here, complexity is spatial and social. The builders understood how stone shapes movement, how walls guide attention, how elevation transforms meaning. They did not need height to Yangshan Quarry. Just outside the modern city of Nanjing, carved into a quiet mountainside, lies one of the most revealing failures in human history. It is not a ruin in the traditional sense. Nothing collapsed. Nothing eroded away. Instead, everything stopped, midway through ambition. This is the abandoned giant of Yangshan Quarry. At first glance, the site feels unreal. 3 colossal stone blocks remain partially carved from the living rock, each one massive beyond practical comprehension. Together, they were meant to form a single monumental stele, a stone monument intended to honor the father of the Ming dynasty's founding emperor. But the monument was never completed. And that abandonment is what makes Yangshan extraordinary. The 3 pieces are still there, the base. Each lies exactly where it was carved, still attached or resting near the quarry face. The largest weighs an estimated 16,000 tons, making it one of the heaviest objects ever attempted in pre-industrial history. To put that in perspective, modern cranes struggle to lift a fraction of that weight. And yet, someone approved this project. Yangshan Quarry dates to the early 15th century, during the reign of the Yongle Emperor. His vision was clear, a stele larger than any ever created, a statement of legitimacy, power, and permanence. But the stone tells a different story. The quarry walls show methodical planning. Channels were cut around the blocks. Surfaces were smoothed. Separation lines were defined. The workers clearly understood how to isolate massive volumes of stone from bedrock. This was not reckless carving. It was precise. What they underestimated was not technique. It was logistics. Moving these blocks from the quarry to their intended destination would have required transporting them several kilometers across uneven terrain. No road system existed capable of bearing such weight. No sled, roller, or barge could realistically handle it. The moment the stone was freed from the mountain, the project became impossible, and so it was abandoned. The blocks were left where they were carved, never broken down, never repurposed. In a culture that reused stone aggressively, this decision is striking. It suggests the scale crossed a psychological threshold. The stones were too big to fail, and too big to fix. Walking among them today is disorienting. Tool marks remain visible across the surfaces, revealing the labor of hundreds of workers. Chisel lines run in parallel, consistent patterns. This was organized, disciplined work carried out over years. Not days, not weeks, years. The abandoned giant exposes something rarely preserved, the limits of ancient engineering. Not in theory, but in practice. It shows exactly where ambition outran feasibility. But it also shows something else, confidence. Because attempting something like this implies extraordinary faith in human capability. The planners believed, at least initially, that solutions would emerge. That manpower, ingenuity, and persistence could overcome scale itself. This belief did not come from ignorance. Ming China was technologically advanced, with experience moving large stones, building canals, and coordinating massive labor forces. Yangshan was not a naive mistake. It was a calculated risk. The quarry also reveals a deeper truth about monumental construction. Most ancient monuments we admire today survived because they were possible. Projects that failed were erased, dismantled, or forgotten. Yangshan survived because it failed too completely to be erased. That makes it honest. There are no legends attached to these stones, no myths of divine intervention. Just the quiet admission that even powerful civilizations sometimes misjudge the physical world. And yet, the precision of the carving remains breathtaking. The surfaces are flat, edges are straight, angles are deliberate. This level of control over such enormous mass suggests techniques and organizational skill that rival modern quarrying, achieved entirely by hand. In a series exploring structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the abandoned giant of Yangshan Quarry holds a unique place. It does not challenge history by succeeding impossibly. It challenges history by showing how close ancient engineers came to doing something that modern engineers would still hesitate to attempt. It proves that the ancient world did not lack ambition, confidence, or understanding of stone. It lacked only one thing: a way to move what it created. Standing beside the unfinished stele today, the scale overwhelms quietly. There is no drama, no mystery music needed. The stone itself delivers the message. Human intelligence has always pushed limits. Sometimes it breaks them. Sometimes it discovers them. Yangshan Quarry is the exact point where that discovery was carved into a mountain and left there. Not as a warning, but as a record. A record of how far people were willing to go, and how close they came. Hayamonga, Amaui. On the eastern edge of the island of Tongatapu, where the Pacific Ocean stretches uninterrupted to the horizon, 3 massive limestone blocks stand in silence. They do not rise into a complex. They do not anchor a city. There are no walls around them, no temples attached, no settlements pressed close. Just stone, placed with intention, waiting. This is Hayamonga Amaui, often described as the Stonehenge of the Pacific. The comparison is tempting, but misleading. Hayamonga, Amaui is not a circle. It is not a calendar carved across many stones. It is something far more restrained and far more precise, a trilithon. 2 vertical uprights support a single horizontal lintel, forming a stone gateway nearly 6 meters tall. Each block weighs several tons. The limestone was quarried locally, cut with care, transported and raised without metal tools, wheels, or draft animals. This alone demands attention. The monument is traditionally dated to the 13th century CE, during the reign of the Tuitonga dynasty, a powerful maritime state that controlled vast stretches of the South Pacific. But oral traditions suggest the site may preserve older knowledge, reinterpreted and reused by later rulers. The name itself, the Burden of Maui, links the structure to Polynesian myth, where the demigod Maui is said to have lifted islands from the sea. Myth, here, does not explain the monument. It frames it. The stones were shaped with remarkable precision. The lintel rests securely on carved notches atop the uprights, locking the structure into place. This is not simple stacking. It is joinery, stone designed to interlock. Such joints prevent lateral movement during earthquakes and storms, both common in the region. This suggests an understanding of stability beyond trial and error. Someone had done this before, or understood the forces involved. The placement of Hayamonga Amaui is equally deliberate. The monument aligns with the rising sun during the winter solstice and the setting sun during the summer solstice. At specific times of year, sunlight passes cleanly through the gateway, framing the horizon in a way that lasts only moments. This alignment is exact. To achieve it, builders needed long-term observation of solar movement across seasons. Polynesian cultures were master navigators, reading stars, sun, wind, and waves with extraordinary accuracy. Hayamonga. Amaui appears to translate that navigational knowledge into stone. The sky, fixed in architecture. But the structure's function may not have been purely astronomical. The gateway form suggests passage, not physical, but symbolic. Walking through the trilithon would have marked transition, from ordinary space into ceremonial time. This aligns with Polynesian concepts of sacred thresholds, where movement itself carries meaning. Power was not displayed through enclosure or height. It was displayed through alignment. The surrounding landscape reinforces this idea. The monument stands on relatively flat ground, unobstructed, with clear sightlines to the horizon. Nothing competes with it. Nothing distracts. This isolation is intentional. Ha'amonga, a Maui, does not dominate through scale alone. It dominates through placement. Transporting the stones remains one of the most debated aspects of the site. Estimates suggest each upright weighs more than 20 tons. Without metal tools, the builders would have relied on rope, timber rollers, earthen ramps, and coordinated labor. This implies social organization. Large groups working in rhythm, shared knowledge of technique, leadership capable of directing effort without written plans. The trilithon also hints at political authority. Some researchers believe it marked royal power, a ceremonial gateway associated with the Tui Tonga rulers, reinforcing their role as intermediaries between gods and people. But again, restraint is key. There are no inscriptions, no carved faces, no declarations of conquest. Authority here is implied, not shouted. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Ha'amonga a Maui stands out because it compresses enormous knowledge into minimal form. 3 stones, 1 alignment, enduring meaning. This challenges a modern bias. That complexity requires complexity of appearance. Polynesian societies demonstrate the opposite. They encoded astronomical, navigational, and social knowledge into elegant simplicity. Stone became memory. Alignment became instruction. Standing beneath the lintel today, the experience is quiet and deeply human. The stone does not overwhelm. The sky does. The moment of alignment passes quickly, and then it is gone. You have to be there at the right time. You have to wait. That patience mirrors the mindset of the builders themselves, observers of cycles measured not in days, but in generations. Ha'amonga a Maui reminds us that advanced thinking does not always leave behind sprawling ruins. Sometimes it leaves behind a single precise gesture carved into the land, a doorway, a horizon, a moment of light. And long after the people who built it sailed on, long after their canoes vanished into the Pacific, that moment still returns, exactly when it was meant to. Ponce Monolith. On the high plateau of the Bolivian Altiplano, where the air is thin and the horizon feels endlessly distant, stands a solitary stone figure. It does not dominate its surroundings through size alone. It does not rise dramatically into the sky. Instead, it stands quietly, upright, balanced, and enduring, as it has for centuries. This is the Ponce monolith of Tiwanaku. At first glance, the statue appears simple, a tall rectangular pillar carved into a human form, hands clasping objects, face calm and expressionless. But the longer you look, the more the simplicity dissolves. Nothing here is casual. The Ponce monolith stands just over 3 meters tall, carved from a single block of andesite, a volcanic stone known for its hardness and resistance to weathering. Working andesite is difficult even with modern tools. Shaping it with stone implements requires patience, precision, and deep understanding of material limits. Every surface here was intentional. The figure is perfectly balanced. Weight is distributed evenly along the vertical axis. The statue has survived earthquakes, extreme temperature swings, and centuries of exposure at nearly 4,000 meters above sea level. That survival is not accidental. The monolith was originally erected at the ceremonial center of Tiwanaku, one of the most enigmatic ancient cities in the world. Tiwanaku flourished long before the Inca, reaching its height between roughly 500 and 1000 CE, though some elements of the site may be older. The Ponce monolith belongs to this deeper layer of Andean history. The figure is carved in high relief, with geometric motifs covering the body like a coated garment. These designs are not decorative patterns. They are symbols. Repeated, ordered, and consistent with iconography found throughout Tiwanaku. This consistency suggests shared meaning. The hands hold ritual objects, possibly staffs or ceremonial implements, though their exact interpretation remains debated. What is clear is that the posture is formal, controlled, and deliberate. This is not a portrait, it is a role. The face of the monolith is especially striking. The eyes are wide, symmetrical, and unblinking. The mouth is closed, neutral. There is no emotion carved here, no joy, no anger, no fear. This figure exists outside ordinary human time. Some researchers believe the monolith represents a priest, ancestor, or divine intermediary, a being positioned between worlds. Others argue it symbolizes authority, order, or cosmic balance rather than an individual. These interpretations differ, but they converge on one point. The statue was not meant to depict a person as they lived. It was meant to embody a concept. The placement of the monolith reinforces this idea. It stood among other carved figures, platforms, and sunken courts, arranged with strict geometry and alignment. Movement through Tiwanaku was guided. Space was choreographed. The monolith was part of a system. Carving a statue of this precision required more than artistic skill. It required measurement, symmetry, planning. Errors could not be corrected easily in stone this hard. Mistakes would be permanent. Yet the proportions are exact. The vertical lines are straight. The carved motifs align perfectly across surfaces. The figure's geometry holds from every angle. This level of accuracy suggests standardized techniques and trained specialists, not improvisation. What makes the Ponce monolith especially unsettling is how little we know about the society that created it, despite the sophistication on display. Tiwanaku left no deciphered written records. Its builders worked stone at a scale and precision that rival later civilizations, yet their beliefs, language, and social structure remain largely inferred. The monolith speaks, but not in words. Its symbolism appears tied to cycles: agricultural, astronomical, and ceremonial. Tiwanaku society depended on precise timing to survive in a harsh environment. Frost could destroy crops overnight. Water management was critical. Knowledge of seasons was life-saving. Order mattered. The calm, unchanging presence of the monolith may reflect this worldview. Stability in a fragile world. A reminder of continuity amid uncertainty. Some researchers have suggested that monoliths like this were erected to anchor sacred space, to act as fixed points in ritual landscapes. Others believe they marked ceremonial authority, reinforcing social cohesion through shared symbolism. Again, these ideas are not mutually exclusive. What is undeniable is the level of intention embedded in the stone. This was not art for art's sake. It was meaning made durable. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Ponce monolith stands as a reminder that sophistication is not always loud. Sometimes it stands quietly, perfectly upright, holding knowledge in plain sight, yet just beyond interpretation. Standing before the monolith today, the experience is subtle but powerful. There is no dramatic narrative imposed by the stone, no clear instruction on what to feel. Instead, there is presence, a presence that has outlasted the city around it, outlasted belief systems, outlasted empires. The Ponce monolith does not tell us what the people of Tiwanaku believed. It tells us that they believed deeply enough to carve belief into one of the hardest stones available, and to do so with precision, balance, and restraint. It reminds us that ancient intelligence often expressed itself not through explanation, but through form. Stone standing against time, meaning resisting erosion. Silence doing the work of memory. Giza Plateau. On the Giza Plateau, where pyramids rise with mathematical certainty from the desert floor, there are details so small that most visitors never notice them. They are not monumental blocks, not towering walls, not grand chambers. They are marks, circular cuts in granite, perfectly round holes drilled deep into stone. smooth cores extracted from one of the hardest materials available to the ancient world. These are known today as the core drills of Giza, and they quietly challenge almost everything we think we know about ancient Egyptian stoneworking. Granite is not an easy material. It ranks high on the Mohs scale of hardness and is composed of quartz crystals that rapidly destroy soft tools. Even with modern steel equipment, cutting granite efficiently requires power, precision, and controlled abrasion. Yet, at Giza, particularly in granite blocks from the Valley Temple, the Great Pyramid Complex, and nearby structures, we find drilled holes that penetrate deep into solid stone with remarkable consistency. These are not shallow indentations. Some extend several centimeters into granite. Others show clear evidence of cylindrical cores being removed. The drill marks are unmistakable. Spiral striations line the inner walls of the holes, evenly spaced, continuous, and smooth. These spirals indicate rotational drilling under steady pressure, not hammering, not pecking, rotation. This immediately raises a question. What kind of tool could produce this result? According to conventional archaeology, ancient Egyptians used copper drills combined with abrasive sand to cut stone. Copper alone is too soft to cut granite, but with quartz-rich sand acting as the cutting agent, slow abrasion becomes possible, in theory. But theory struggles with the evidence. Some of the core drill holes show feed rates, the speed at which the drill penetrated the stone, that appear far too fast for hand-powered copper tools. The spirals are tight and consistent, suggesting controlled pressure and continuous rotation. This is not casual labor, it is precision machining. In some cases, cores appear to have been removed cleanly, leaving behind smooth cylindrical voids. The extracted cores themselves, where preserved, show the same spiral markings on their exterior surfaces, proof that they were rotated, not chipped free. This is important. It means the tool did not simply scrape the surface. It maintained alignment. It applied consistent force. That requires rigidity. A flexible drill shaft would wobble. A hand-held tool would drift. Yet these holes remain straight, centered, and uniform. So how was this achieved? Some researchers propose that Egyptians used weighted drilling systems, vertical shafts with added mass, allowing gravity to provide constant pressure while workers rotated the drill from above. This would reduce fatigue and improve consistency. Others suggest more complex setups involving bow drills, compound leverage, or guided sleeves to prevent lateral movement. None of these explanations are impossible, but none are fully demonstrated either. What complicates the issue further is scale. These core drill marks are not isolated. They appear across multiple sites in different structures, suggesting standardized technique rather than experimental outliers. Standardization implies training. Training implies institutional knowledge. Someone taught others how to do this. The presence of core drilling also suggests a level of planning rarely discussed. You do not drill granite without a reason. Core drilling is typically used to remove material efficiently, create precise openings, or extract samples. This implies design intent before construction. The builders knew where holes were needed. They knew how deep to drill. They knew how to keep alignment. This challenges a simplified image of ancient Egyptian labor as purely brute force. Yes, labor was immense, but it was guided. What makes the Giza core drills especially unsettling is how little emphasis they receive in mainstream narratives. Pyramids are explained through hauling, ramps, and manpower. The fine details, the machining level work, are often dismissed as minor or anomalous. But anomalies accumulate. When enough small inconsistencies align, they stop being anomalies. They become data. The core drills also connect Giza to other ancient sites around the world. Similar drilling marks have been found in India, Peru, and elsewhere, in hard stone contexts that pose the same questions. Did these cultures independently develop similar techniques? Or does this point to a shared understanding of stoneworking that predates what we currently accept? These are not claims. They are questions raised by physical evidence. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, The core drills of Giza are critical because they shift focus away from monuments and toward methods, not what was built, but how it was built. Methods are harder to mythologize. They either work or they don't, and the marks at Giza show methods that worked extremely well. Standing beside these drill holes today, there is nothing dramatic about them. They do not impress tourists. They are not photographed often. But for engineers, machinists, and stoneworkers, they are deeply unsettling because they look familiar. They resemble the results of controlled rotary drilling, a process we associate with far later technology. And yet, they exist here, in granite blocks that are thousands of years old. The core drills of Giza do not claim lost machines or advanced civilizations. They do something far more uncomfortable. They suggest that ancient knowledge was more nuanced, more experimental, and more technically capable than the simplified stories we often tell. That ancient builders did not rely on strength alone. They relied on technique. And technique leaves traces, small, circular, and precise, quietly waiting for anyone willing to look closely enough to notice. Gornaya Shoria stone structures. Deep in southern Siberia, where the taiga stretches for hundreds of kilometers and winter dominates most of the year, there is a landscape that feels fundamentally out of place. Not because it is dramatic, but because it looks constructed in a region where construction of this scale should not exist. This is the ancient stone forest of Gornaya Shoria. Hidden in the mountainous forests of the Kemerovo region, these formations were largely unknown to the outside world until relatively recently. Even today, reaching them requires days of travel through remote terrain, areas untouched by roads, settlements, or modern infrastructure. And that isolation matters, because what stands here is not easily explained as coincidence. Massive granite blocks, some estimated to weigh over 3,000 tons, are stacked atop one another with flat surfaces and sharp angles. In places, the stones resemble walls. In others, they appear arranged like terraces or collapsed towers. From certain angles, the formations look unmistakably artificial. Right angles appear where natural fracturing should be irregular. Stones rest on one another with surprisingly small contact points. Blocks are aligned horizontally, creating the visual impression of deliberate placement rather than chaotic collapse. This is why Gornaya Shoria has sparked such intense debate. Geologists argue these formations are the result of natural processes: granite jointing, freeze-thaw cycles, erosion, and tectonic stress. And it is true. Nature can create remarkable geometry under the right conditions. But the scale here complicates that explanation. Granite blocks this large are rare anywhere. Blocks stacked this way are rarer still. And blocks showing apparent alignment across extended areas raise questions that geology alone does not fully settle. The site spans a wide region, not a single outcrop. Similar formations appear across ridges and slopes, suggesting a pattern rather than an isolated anomaly. If this is natural, it is unusually consistent. What makes the stone forest especially unsettling is its resemblance to megalithic architecture found elsewhere in the world. Cyclopean walls in the Andes, polygonal masonry in the Mediterranean, and massive stone terraces in Asia. The visual language is familiar: huge stones, minimal mortar, reliance on mass rather than ornament. But here, there are no associated settlements, no tools found nearby, no inscriptions, no cultural layer clearly linked to the stones, just stone on stone. Some researchers have proposed that Gornaya Shoria may represent the remains of a very ancient structure, possibly dating back to the end of the last ice age or earlier. This would place it far outside accepted timelines for large-scale stone construction in this region. Others argue that we are seeing a form of natural ruin, geological formations that resemble architecture because the human brain is wired to recognize patterns. Both interpretations carry weight, but neither resolves everything. There are stones here that appear shifted, as if displaced by force after placement. Blocks lean at angles that suggest movement rather than simple collapse. In a few areas, stones appear wedged or braced, configurations that are mechanically stable but geologically unusual. The environment adds another layer of complexity. Gornaya Shoria experiences extreme temperature fluctuations. Freeze-thaw cycles exert enormous pressure on stone. Over thousands of years, these forces can move blocks, crack surfaces, and rearrange formations. But even accounting for this, the scale remains difficult. Moving a 3,000-ton block requires energy far beyond frost expansion alone, unless it was already positioned in a way that allowed gravity to assist. Which raises the question: was gravity guided? The stone forest does not provide clear answers. There are no obvious quarry marks, no cut surfaces, no smooth joints like those seen at known megalithic sites. But there is geometry, and geometry is rarely random at this scale. In a series exploring ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Gornaya Shoria occupies a unique position. It sits at the boundary between archaeology and geology, forcing both disciplines to confront uncomfortable uncertainty. If these formations are natural, they represent one of the most extreme examples of geological order ever documented. If they are artificial, they imply a level of ancient activity in Siberia that would fundamentally alter our understanding of human prehistory. Either conclusion is profound. Standing among these stones today, the feeling is not one of revelation, but of restraint. The site does not announce itself as a ruin. It does not invite interpretation. It simply exists, massive, silent, and unmoved by debate. The forest grows around it. Snow covers it. Ice grips the joints. Time continues its work. And the stones remain. Perhaps that is the most important lesson of Gornaya Shoria, that not every ancient mystery announces itself clearly, that some places sit unresolved, not because we lack imagination, but because we lack certainty. The stone forest does not demand belief in lost civilizations or forgotten empires. It demands patience, observation, and humility in the face of scale, because whether shaped by nature alone or guided by hands long erased by time, these stones represent something we rarely acknowledge, that the past still contains places we do not yet understand. And sometimes, understanding begins not with answers, but with the quiet admission that we are still learning how to ask the right questions. Karahan Tepe. In the dry highlands of southeastern Turkey, where limestone ridges stretch toward the horizon and the land seems untouched by time, archaeologists uncovered something that should not exist according to the old story of civilization. Stone pillars, carved symbols, ritual architecture, all dating back nearly 12,000 years. This is Karahan Tepe. Long before cities, long before agriculture was supposed to reshape human life, people came to this place and altered the landscape with intention. They did not build shelters. They did not construct villages. Instead, they carved stone, on a scale that suggests planning, coordination, and belief far earlier than history once allowed. Karahan Tepe belongs to the same Neolithic world as Göbekli Tepe, but it tells a different, quieter story. Where Göbekli Tepe reveals monumental circles, Karahan Tepe spreads outward, across a broad limestone plateau, dotted with pillars, pits, and carved bedrock features. More than 250 T-shaped pillars have been identified here. Some stand upright. Others remain partially carved, still emerging from the living rock. This is crucial. At Karahan Tepe, we do not just see finished monuments. We see the process. Stone was not transported from distant quarries. It was shaped where it stood. The pillars were carved directly from bedrock, detached carefully and raised nearby. This requires an intimate understanding of stone, where it fractures, how it bears weight, and how to free massive blocks without shattering them. These people were not experimenting blindly. They knew what they were doing. The T-shaped pillars are unmistakable. They echo the forms seen at Göbekli Tepe, abstract human figures, stylized, faceless, and imposing. Some bear carved arms, hands, and symbols. Others stand plain, their form itself carrying meaning. The T-shape is not structural necessity, it is symbolic. And symbolism implies shared understanding. One of the most unsettling discoveries at Karahan Tepe is a carved stone head emerging from the bedrock, human in form, staring upward, partially submerged in the earth. Nearby, a ring of upright pillars surrounds a deep pit carved into the limestone. This arrangement does not resemble habitation. It resembles ceremony. The pits are deep and smooth, their walls shaped deliberately. They were not dug for storage or shelter. Their purpose remains unknown, but their construction required immense labor with stone tools alone. Stone tools, no metal, no pottery, no wheels. And yet, this level of shaping was achieved. This challenges a long-standing assumption that complex belief systems emerged only after agriculture created surplus food and stable populations. Karahan Tepe suggests the opposite. Belief came first. People gathered not because they had cities, but because they shared meaning. Ritual created community before farming did. The age of the site is confirmed through stratigraphy and radiocarbon dating, placing its earliest phases around 10,000 BCE. That is thousands of years before Stonehenge, thousands of years before pyramids, thousands of years before writing. And yet, the scale rivals later monuments. Moving, carving, and erecting these pillars required coordination of large groups. Tasks had to be divided. Knowledge had to be transmitted. Mistakes had consequences. This implies social organization, not hierarchical kingship, but collective effort guided by tradition. The site also reveals restraint. Unlike later civilizations, there is no attempt to build upward endlessly. No walls enclosing settlements, no fortifications. Karahan Tepe was not meant to be defended. It was meant to be returned to. Over time, parts of the site were deliberately buried. Pillars were covered with soil and stone, preserved rather than destroyed. This mirrors behavior seen at Göbekli Tepe and suggests a ritual closure, a conscious decision to end use, not abandon it. Why bury something that took so much effort to create? Because its purpose had been fulfilled. This concept is difficult for modern minds to accept. We build to preserve. These people built to complete. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the pillars of Karahan Tepe may be the most disruptive of all. They do not just challenge dates or methods, they challenge sequence. They tell us that humans were capable of organizing labor, shaping stone, and expressing abstract belief at the very beginning of settled life, not as a result of civilization, but as its cause. Standing at Karahan Tepe today, the silence is overwhelming. Wind moves across limestone. Shadows stretch across half-buried pillars. Nothing feels unfinished. That is the unsettling part. This site was not abandoned because it failed. It was closed because it succeeded. The people who built Karahan Tepe did not leave behind writing to explain themselves. They left stone, shaped with care, placed with meaning, and then hidden from view for 10,000 years. Only now are we beginning to understand what that means. That civilization did not rise slowly from simple beginnings. It emerged suddenly, driven by belief, ritual, and shared purpose. And Karahan Tepe stands as one of the clearest reminders that the roots of human intelligence run far deeper than we once imagined. Gebel Barkal. Rising abruptly from the flat plains of northern Sudan, a solitary sandstone mountain breaks the horizon. It is not the tallest peak. It is not the largest formation. But for more than 3,000 years, it was one of the most powerful sacred places in northeast Africa. This is Gebel Barkal. From a distance, the mountain appears simple. A steep cliff, a narrow summit, a sharp pinnacle that catches the light at sunrise and sunset. But as people approached it in antiquity, what mattered was not the mountain itself. It was what surrounded it. At the base of Gebel Barkal, archaeologists uncovered a series of stone platforms, carefully leveled foundations that once supported temples, altars, and ceremonial structures tied to both Egyptian and Kushite belief systems. These platforms are older than the stone temples that later stood upon them, and that detail changes everything. The earliest platforms were cut directly into bedrock or built from tightly fitted sandstone blocks, forming stable, raised surfaces on uneven terrain. Their geometry is restrained but exact. Corners are squared, edges align. Elevation is consistent. This is not casual groundwork. It is intentional preparation. Gebel Barkal was sacred long before monumental architecture arrived. Egyptian texts describe it as the southern home of the god Amun, a divine counterpart to Karnak in Thebes. But archaeological evidence suggests that ritual activity here predates Egyptian control. Meaning came first. Stone followed. The platforms functioned as anchors, fixing sacred space into the landscape. They created level ground where none existed, transforming the natural slope into a sequence of ritual stages. Movement across the site was guided subtly, not by walls, but by elevation. Step up, pause, proceed. This rhythm is repeated across the complex. Later temples were rebuilt again and again on the same platforms, sometimes for centuries. Walls collapsed. Columns fell. Dynasties ended, but the platforms remained, reused with remarkable consistency. Because they worked, they resisted erosion. They managed runoff during seasonal floods. They stabilized heavy stone structures in a harsh desert climate. This is environmental engineering disguised as ritual space. The builders understood that permanence in this region depended not on height, but on grounding. Sand shifts. Wind erodes. Stone survives only when weight is managed correctly. The platforms at Gebel Barkal do exactly that. They distribute load outward rather than downward. They lock structures into the bedrock rather than fighting it. Even when temples were dismantled or destroyed, the platforms preserved alignment, allowing later builders to rebuild precisely where the sacred geometry demanded. This continuity reveals something deeper. Sacred space here was fixed, not flexible. Belief could change names. Power could change rulers. But location did not change. The mountain itself reinforced this stability. From certain angles, the pinnacle of Gebel Barkal resembles a rearing cobra, a symbol of divine authority in Egyptian iconography. This natural form likely influenced the site's sanctity long before formal religion was imposed. Nature suggested meaning. Humans formalized it. The stone platforms bridge that transition. They are not dramatic. They do not impress through size alone. But they are precise, repeated, and resilient, qualities that matter more than spectacle in ancient engineering. What is especially striking is how quiet these platforms are in the archaeological record. They are often overshadowed by statues, reliefs, and inscriptions. Yet without them, none of those monuments could have survived. They are invisible intelligence. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the stone platforms of Gebel Barkal remind us that civilization often reveals itself from the ground. Up, before gods receive temples, before kings carve their names, before empires declare authority, someone prepares the earth. Standing among the platforms today, the experience is subtle. You do not feel overwhelmed. You feel oriented. The space guides you without instruction. The mountain looms, but the stone beneath your feet does the real work. It holds memory in place. Gebel Barkal teaches us that ancient builders understood something modern construction often forgets. That lasting power does not come from what rises highest, but from what is placed correctly at the beginning. Stone platforms rarely make history books, but here they held a sacred world together for millennia, and they are still doing it. Banduria Platform Complex. Along the dry coast of central Peru, where desert meets the Pacific and rivers cut thin green corridors through sand, there is a place that does not announce itself with height or spectacle. It rises slowly, layer by layer, stone upon stone. This is Banduria. From a distance, the site appears understated, a series of low mounds and broad terraces shaped into the landscape. But as you approach, the scale becomes clear. These are not natural hills. They are platforms, built deliberately, expanded carefully, and maintained over long periods of time. Banduria belongs to the late Archaic period, roughly between 3000 and 1800 BCE, a time when, according to older models, societies should still be small, loosely organized, and technologically limited. But Banduria does not behave like a temporary settlement. It behaves like a system. The platform complex consists of multiple stepped constructions arranged around open spaces. Each platform is composed of stone fill and facing walls, stacked in a way that distributes weight evenly across unstable coastal ground. Corners are reinforced. Edges are straight. Elevation changes are gradual, guiding movement rather than obstructing it. This is intentional architecture. The builders understood something fundamental about their environment. Coastal Peru is seismically active. The soil shifts. Floods arrive unpredictably during climatic events. Structures that rely on vertical walls alone do not last here. Platforms do. By spreading mass horizontally, Banduria's builders created stability through balance rather than height. The platforms absorb movement. They settle without collapsing. They resist erosion not by fighting nature, but by accommodating it. This is engineering by observation. What makes Banduria especially significant is its age. It is contemporaneous with, and in some cases older than, early monumental sites in Mesopotamia and Egypt. Yet it exists, without writing, without metal tools, and without the agricultural surplus traditionally thought necessary for large-scale construction. Instead, the economy here was mixed. Marine resources from the Pacific provided reliable protein. River valleys supported small-scale agriculture. This balance allowed people to invest time and labor into building, not because they were forced to, but because they chose to. Choice matters. The platforms were not built all at once. Archaeological layers show gradual expansion. A platform raised, extended, reinforced, then built upon again. Each phase respected the geometry of what came before. This implies continuity. People returned. They remembered. They added without erasing. At the center of the complex, open plazas connect the platforms, forming gathering spaces rather than enclosed sanctuaries. These plazas were likely used for communal events, rituals, meetings, seasonal ceremonies, moments when the community came together, rather than retreated inward. Banduria was not defensive. It was inclusive. This is a crucial distinction. Walls keep people out. Platforms bring people together. The lack of fortifications suggests that social cohesion here was maintained through shared space and shared activity, not through fear or control. Architecture reinforced community rather than hierarchy. And yet, the precision is undeniable. Stones were selected, transported, and placed with care. Fill was layered to prevent slippage. Facing walls were aligned to maintain clean edges. Drainage was subtly managed, allowing water to pass through rather than pool. These details do not emerge accidentally. They reflect accumulated knowledge, techniques refined over generations, passed through practice rather than instruction manuals. What is especially striking is how Banduria fits into a much larger pattern along the Peruvian coast. Similar platform complexes appear up and down the region, suggesting that this was not an isolated experiment. It was a tradition, one that predates ceramics, predates metallurgy, predates state-level societies. This forces a reconsideration of how complexity emerges. At Banduria, architecture does not follow power. Power follows cooperation. The platforms do not glorify rulers. There are no statues, no inscriptions, no tombs announcing elite dominance. Instead, the emphasis is on shared elevation, literally raising the ground where people gather. Meaning is built into space itself. Standing atop one of the platforms today, the view is calm. The ocean breathes in the distance. The valley lies open. Nothing feels enclosed or controlled. The architecture does not overwhelm the senses. It steadies them. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Banduria platform complex stands as quiet evidence that monumental planning does not require kings, writing, or metal. It requires patience. It requires memory. It requires an understanding of place. Banduria reminds us that some of humanity's earliest large constructions were not attempts to dominate nature or each other, but efforts to create stability in an unpredictable world. Stone was not raised to impress the sky. It was laid carefully so people could gather, return, and build again. And in that simplicity, repeated over centuries, a form of intelligence emerges that feels deeply modern. Not loud, not forceful, but enduring. La Galgada. High in the narrow canyon of the Tablachaca River in northern Peru, far from the coastal plains, and long before the rise of Andean empires, people began shaping stone for reasons that had nothing to do with defense, power, or survival alone. They built temples. This place is known as La Galgada, and it belongs to a period of human history that still feels difficult to accept. The temples here date back more than 4,000 years, to a time before pottery, before metallurgy, and before the large urban societies most people associate with monumental construction in the Andes. Yet the stonework remains. La Galgada is composed of two primary temple mounds, facing one another across a central space. Each mound contains internal chambers, narrow passageways, and carefully constructed stone walls, all built with deliberate symmetry. These are not piles of rock or crude enclosures. They are planned ritual structures designed to control movement, light, and access. The builders selected stone carefully, stacking and fitting it to create walls that could endure seismic stress in one of the most earthquake-prone regions on Earth. Larger stones anchor the base. Smaller stones lock the structure together. Weight is distributed outward, allowing the temples to settle without collapse over centuries. This is an experience translated into architecture. Inside the temples, archaeologists found evidence of repeated ritual activity. Floors were resurfaced multiple times. Walls were repaired rather than replaced. Fire remains were carefully contained. Human burials were placed within the structures, suggesting that these temples were not only places of ceremony, but places of memory. The dead were not removed from sacred space. They became part of it. This is a critical point. La Galgada was not built for spectacle. It was not meant to be seen from great distances. It sits quietly within the canyon, partially concealed by terrain. The effort was focused inward, on experience rather than display. Movement through the temple complexes was intentional. Narrow entrances restrict access. Corridors turn slightly, preventing direct sightlines. Chambers open gradually, controlling how space is revealed. This architecture slows people down. That slowness matters. It suggests that ritual here was about transition, leaving ordinary life behind step by step. The temple was not a destination alone. It was a process. What makes La Galgada especially significant is its age. It belongs to the Prehistoric period, a time when societies are often assumed to lack the organizational capacity for large construction projects. Yet here, we see coordinated labor, standardized techniques, and long-term maintenance. People return to these temples again and again. They remembered how they were built. They preserved their form. They respected what came before. This continuity implies shared belief strong enough to sustain effort across generations. No rulers. Name is carved into the stone. No symbols of dominance appear. The architecture does not glorify individuals. It reinforces tradition. The location itself reinforces this idea. La Galgada sits between ecological zones, not fully coastal, not fully highland. This position may have made it a gathering point for different groups, a neutral space where shared ritual created social cohesion. Architecture here acted as social glue. The temples also show an early understanding of sacred geometry, not in abstract mathematical terms, but in spatial balance. The opposing mounds mirror each other. The central space holds tension. The entire complex feels stable, centered, and resolved. Nothing appears accidental. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, La Galgada stands as quiet but powerful evidence that ritual architecture emerged very early in human history. Not after societies became complex, but as one of the forces that made complexity possible. Belief organized people, ritual justified labor, stone preserved memory. Standing at La Galgada today, the experience is subdued. There are no towering walls or dramatic carvings, but the site feels complete. It does not ask for reconstruction or interpretation. it simply holds space. La Galgada reminds us that some of humanity's earliest monuments were not built to impress the future. They were built to serve the present, to create meaning, continuity, and shared identity in a world that was still being understood. And in doing so, these stone temples quietly challenge one of the oldest assumptions in archaeology. That belief followed civilization. Here, civilization followed belief. Risco Caído. High in the volcanic heart of Gran Canaria, carved into steep cliffs that overlook deep ravines and shifting light, there is a place where stone was shaped not to be seen, but to be illuminated. This is Risco Caído. From the outside, the caves appear modest. Small openings cut into volcanic rock. Narrow entrances easily missed by anyone not looking closely. There are no towers, no walls, no markers announcing importance. And yet, this was one of the most sophisticated sacred spaces ever created by a prehistoric island society. Risco Caído is a complex of artificial caves carved by the indigenous Canarian people centuries before European contact. These were not natural shelters adapted for use. They were excavated deliberately, chamber by chamber, into the rock itself. The effort required to carve them is significant. Volcanic tuff is workable but unforgiving. Mistakes cannot be hidden. Once cut, stone remains exactly as shaped. Every surface here was intentional. The most remarkable cave, often referred to as Cave 6, reveals its purpose only at specific moments in time. A small opening in the cave wall allows sunlight to enter during certain times of the year. As the sun moves across the sky, a beam of light travels slowly across the interior surface. And when it does, something extraordinary happens. The light projects shapes, elongated forms that move across carved reliefs on the wall. These reliefs resemble human figures, symbols, and possibly fertility imagery. The movement of light activates them, one by one, across days and seasons. This is not decoration. It is time made visible. The light phenomenon aligns with seasonal cycles, particularly equinoxes and solstices, transforming the cave into a calendar that tracks the agricultural year. The builders did not need writing to record time. They built it into stone and light. To achieve this, they had to understand solar movement with precision. The opening's angle, size, and position are exact. A small deviation would break the effect. The interior surface had to be shaped to receive light correctly. This required long-term observation, years of watching the sun, generations refining knowledge, memory embedded into architecture. The cave does not function all year. For much of the time, it remains dark, silent, inactive. Its power lies in anticipation, waiting for the moment when light returns. That waiting is part of the design. Risco Caído was not meant for constant use. It was a ceremonial instrument, activated only when the sky allowed it. This transforms a ritual into an event, rare, timed, and meaningful. The surrounding caves reinforce this interpretation. Many were used for storage, habitation, and burial, creating a sacred landscape rather than an isolated shrine. Daily life and ritual existed side by side, connected through movement and memory. The people who built Risco Caído left no written language. We do not know their names, their myths, or their stories. But we know how they watched the sky, and how carefully they responded to it. Carving a sanctuary like this required collective effort. Tools had to be made. Labor had to be organized. Knowledge had to be transmitted accurately. Errors would not reveal themselves immediately, only months later when the sun returned and failed to align. That kind of delayed feedback requires discipline. It also requires trust. What makes Risco Caído especially powerful in a series about structures beyond modern expectations is how quietly advanced it is. There are no massive stones, no heavy lifting, no dramatic silhouettes, just precision. This challenges a modern bias. That sophistication must be visible at a distance. Risco Caído proves that some of the most advanced prehistoric architecture was intimate, hidden, and activated only by nature itself. Light becomes the mechanism, stone becomes the interface, time becomes the message. Standing inside the cave during alignment, the experience is subtle but profound. The light moves slowly. The shapes appear and disappear. Nothing rushes. Nothing demands attention. You have to stay. You have to watch. That slowness mirrors the worldview of the builders. People who lived by cycles rather than clocks, by seasons rather than schedules. Their architecture reflects that rhythm. In a world increasingly defined by speed, Risco Caído feels almost alien. And yet, it may represent one of the purest expressions of prehistoric intelligence. Not domination of nature, but synchronization with it. The cave does not resist the sun. It receives it, guides it, lets it speak. Risco Caído reminds us that ancient people did not always build upward to reach the heavens. Sometimes they carved inward, creating spaces where the sky could enter briefly and leave behind meaning. Stone holds the memory, light activates it, and silence completes the design. This is architecture not meant to impress outsiders. It was meant to teach time itself how to pass through stone, and for centuries it did. Suyangai. Along a quiet bend of the South Han River, where water has carved terraces into the land over tens of thousands of years, archaeologists uncovered something that does not announce itself with monuments or towering walls. It announces itself with pattern. This is Suyangai. At first glance, the site looks unremarkable. River gravel, layered soil, scattered stone. But as excavation progressed, a different picture emerged. Not a single structure, not a city, not a temple, but a landscape organized by repeated human action, preserved from deep prehistory. Suyangai dates to the Upper Paleolithic, more than 30,000 years ago in some layers. This places it far outside the time frame usually associated with architecture or planned space. And yet, within these ancient sediments, archaeologists identified stone arrangements, activity zones, and repeated spatial organization that suggest intention rather than chance. These are not buildings in the modern sense. They are stone structures of behavior. Flat stones were arranged to stabilize working surfaces along the river terrace. Heavier stones appear placed deliberately to anchor windbreaks or define activity edges. Hearth-associated stones recur in similar configurations across multiple occupation layers, over and over again. This repetition matters. Natural processes scatter stone randomly. Humans do not. When the same kinds of stone placements appear across different periods, separated by centuries or millennia, it suggests memory and transmission of practice. People returned here. They remembered where and how to work. They rebuilt the same solutions. Suyangai is one of East Asia's richest Paleolithic sites, yielding tens of thousands of stone tools. But tools alone do not explain the site's significance. What matters is how those tools were used in space. Napping zones appear consistently located relative to the river. Debitage patterns show that stone was worked in designated areas rather than scattered randomly. Certain stones served as anvils repeatedly, their surfaces worn smooth by long-term use. Stone became infrastructure. The river itself was part of the design. Seasonal flooding deposited fresh material and reshaped the terrace, but the inhabitants adapted. They chose slightly elevated zones for repeated activity, avoiding areas prone to erosion. This reveals environmental awareness at a level often underestimated for Paleolithic societies. They did not fight the landscape, they read it. The so-called stone structures at Suyangai are subtle, low, practical, easily overlooked. But that subtlety is exactly what makes them important. They show that early humans were already structuring space, even when they had no reason to build permanent walls. Permanence was not the goal. Continuity was. Suyangai suggests a mode of living where knowledge was embedded not in monuments, but in habits. Where architecture existed as repeated action, rather than fixed form. Where stone placement was enough to anchor daily life without claiming the land forever. This challenges a deeply rooted assumption. That architecture begins with farming. That planning begins with settlement. That complexity requires permanence. At Suyangai, complexity exists without permanence. People organize their workspaces. They optimize tool production. They returned to the same terrace generation after generation, refining their use of stone and space without ever needing to build upward. This is intelligence expressed horizontally. The site also revealed social coordination. Tool production at this scale implies teaching. Skilled. Nappers guiding others. Correcting technique. Sharing knowledge. Stone arrangements likely helped structure these interactions, separating tasks, controlling debris, and creating shared reference points. Stone became a teacher. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Suyangai stands as a reminder that the roots of architecture do not lie in walls or roofs. They lie in organization. Long before temples or platforms, humans were already shaping environments to suit thought, work, and cooperation. They did so quietly, efficiently, and repeatedly, leaving behind patterns rather than monuments. Standing at Suyangai today, there is no dramatic reveal. The river still flows. Gravel still crunches underfoot. The stones do not rise, but that is the point. This place was never meant to impress. It was meant to function. And function, repeated over thousands of years, becomes tradition. Suyangai reminds us that the earliest human structures were not declarations of power or belief. They were solutions, practical, learned, and shared. Stone placed where it mattered. Space used with intention. Knowledge carried not in writing, but in return. Architecture began not when humans built cities, but when they learned to shape their world, one stone at a time. Choga Zanbil. In the low plains of southwestern Iran, where heat presses heavily against the land and the horizon stretches without interruption, there stands a monument that appears, at first, familiar. A stepped tower. A ziggurat. A sacred mountain built by human hands. But at Choka Zanbil, the true story is not found in what rises upward. It is found beneath. Long before the visible ziggurat took shape, the builders of ancient Elam prepared the ground with a series of sub-platforms. Carefully engineered layers of brick, earth, and stone that transformed unstable soil into a structure capable of bearing enormous weight. These sub-platforms are the quiet foundation of one of the most ambitious religious constructions of the Bronze Age. Choka Zanbil was built around 1250 BCE by the Elamite king Untash Napirisha, not as an extension of an existing city, but as a new sacred center created almost entirely from nothing. This decision alone is unusual. Most ancient monuments grow within older urban landscapes. Choka Zanbil was planted deliberately in open terrain, which meant the ground had to be mastered first. The sub-platforms were not simple leveling fills. They were engineered systems. Layers of mud brick were laid in alternating orientations to distribute stress. Compacted earth was added to absorb movement. Drainage channels were integrated invisibly, allowing rainwater to escape without undermining the core. This is soil mechanics in antiquity. Without these sub-platforms, the ziggurat would have cracked, tilted, or collapsed within decades. Instead, it has endured for more than 3,000 years, despite erosion, earthquakes, and abandonment. That endurance is not accidental. The Elamite builders understood that height is meaningless without stability. So before constructing sacred space in the sky, they created it underground, anchoring belief into the earth itself. What makes the sub-platforms especially important is their scale. They extend beyond the footprint of the visible ziggurat, forming a broad base that stabilizes not just the central tower, but surrounding temples and courtyards as well. This suggests a holistic approach to construction. The site was conceived as a single system. Sacred architecture here was not assembled piece by piece. It was planned from the foundation upward, with each layer anticipating the next. This level of foresight challenges the idea that Bronze Age construction relied primarily on tradition rather than calculation. At Choka Zanbil, tradition and engineering converge. The sub-platforms also reveal something subtle about ritual movement. By raising the sacred complex gradually, the builders created a slow ascent, not only physically, but symbolically. Approaching the ziggurat meant passing through successively elevated spaces, each one slightly removed from the ordinary world. Elevation became transition. The platforms beneath your feet changed how you moved, how you looked, how you approached the divine. This was not accidental choreography. It was intentional design, executed at ground level long before walls and stairs were added above. Archaeological excavations show that these sub-platforms were constructed with extraordinary care. Bricks were standardized in size. Courses were aligned precisely. Repairs were made during construction, not after failure. This suggests active supervision. Someone understood load. Someone understood stress. Someone anticipated time. The Elamites left inscriptions describing their gods, but they left no manuals explaining their engineering. And yet, the sub-platforms explained themselves through performance. They worked. What is especially striking is that later cultures recognized this achievement. Even after the fall of Elam, the site was respected. It was not dismantled for building material. It was not overwritten by later empires. The ziggurat was allowed to erode naturally, its foundations quietly holding. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the sub-platforms of Choka Zanbil remind us that the most advanced decisions in ancient architecture were often invisible. We admire height. They invested in depth. Modern ruins tend to emphasize what remains visible: walls, columns, facades. But ancient builders knew that visibility is fleeting. What lasts is what carries weight. Standing at Choga Zanbil today, the ziggurat rises in partial ruin, its upper levels broken by time. But beneath it, the sub-platforms continue to do their work, distributing mass, resisting collapse, preserving alignment. They are still active. This is ancient engineering at its most honest. No mystery tools, no speculation required, just intelligent preparation, executed with discipline and restraint. Choga Zanbil teaches us that some of the greatest achievements of the ancient world were not meant to be admired directly. They were meant to be trusted, trusted to hold belief, trusted to carry stone, trusted to last. And for more than 3 millennia, these sub-platforms have done exactly that, quietly supporting a sacred vision long after the people who conceived it disappeared into history. Monte Baranta. On a windswept plateau in northwestern Sardinia, where the land drops away sharply toward the sea and the horizon feels permanently exposed, a massive stone enclosure stretches across bare rock. It does not rise dramatically. It does not dominate the skyline. Instead, it sits low, heavy, and deliberate, as if pressed into the land rather than built upon it. This is Monte Baranta. At first glance, the site feels ambiguous. It is not immediately clear whether it is defensive, ceremonial, or symbolic. There are no towers, no gateways marked by ornament, no inscriptions to guide interpretation. What remains is stone, large uncut blocks arranged into thick walls that trace the edge of a natural promontory. And that ambiguity is the point. Monte Baranta dates to the late Neolithic or early Copper Age, roughly between 2500 and 2000 BCE, a period when Sardinia was not yet dominated by the famous Nuraghe towers that would later define the island's landscape. This places Monte Baranta in an earlier phase of experimentation, when societies were still deciding how stone could shape power, space, and meaning. The walls here are massive. Constructed from large limestone blocks stacked without mortar, they form a barrier several meters thick in places. The stones are not finely cut. Their power comes from mass rather than precision. Weight is the binding force. Gravity does the work. This is Cyclopean logic, an architectural language that appears across the ancient world, always where permanence and authority are being tested for the first time. But unlike later fortifications, Monte Baranta's walls do not fully enclose a settlement. Instead, they block access to the plateau from the most vulnerable approach, while leaving sheer cliffs and natural drops to serve as the remaining boundaries. This reveals strategic thinking. The builders did not waste effort enclosing what nature already protected. They reinforced only where reinforcement was needed. Stone was placed where landscape alone was insufficient. This is efficiency, not excess. Inside the enclosure, evidence of permanent habitation is limited. There are no dense clusters of houses, no clear domestic quarters. Instead, the interior space feels open, prepared, but not occupied continuously. This suggests that Monte Baranta was not a village. It was a place people came to, a place set apart, a place that mattered. The walls themselves reinforce this interpretation. Their thickness exceeds what would be necessary for simple defense against small groups. They feel symbolic as much as functional, a declaration rather than a response. Stone here marks separation. Outside is ordinary land. Inside is something else. The builders of Monte Baranta understood visibility. From the plateau, the surrounding landscape is laid bare. Movement below can be seen from a distance. Anyone approaching would have been visible long before reaching the wall. This visibility turns the wall into a psychological boundary as much as a physical one. You knew when you crossed it. The construction technique also deserves attention. The stones were gathered locally, but transporting and stacking blocks of this size still required coordination, planning, and shared effort. This was not the work of a single group acting briefly. It was sustained labor. Labor justified only if the site held long-term significance. Archaeological layers suggest multiple phases of use. The wall was maintained, possibly repaired, and respected over time. Later communities did not dismantle it for material. They left it intact, a sign that its meaning persisted even as cultures changed. This continuity mirrors patterns seen across Sardinia, where megalithic structures often outlast the societies that created them, absorbing new interpretations without losing their core presence. Monte Baranta also sits within a broader network of prehistorica, Sardinian sites, dolmens, menhirs, ritual enclosures, all suggesting that the island was already deeply engaged with stone long before the rise of complex tower architecture. The walls here represent an early step in that trajectory, not refined, not decorative, but decisive. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Monte Baranta stands out because it occupies a transitional moment, when societies first began testing how stone could formalize space, assert control, and encode meaning into the land. This was not architecture driven by kings or empires. It was architecture driven by consensus, a shared understanding that this place mattered enough to be set apart, not temporarily, but enduringly. Standing beside the wall today, the experience is subdued. The stones do not overwhelm, they ground. The wind moves freely across the plateau. The sea glints in the distance. Nothing feels enclosed, and yet everything feels defined. That tension is intentional. Monte Baranta reminds us that some of the earliest monumental walls were not built to protect people from enemies. They were built to protect meaning, to mark where ordinary life ended and something else began, to hold space, not bodies, to endure without explanation. And long after the builders disappeared, the walls continued to do exactly what they were designed to do. They remain heavy, silent, certain. Tia stone stelae platforms. In the green highlands of southern Ethiopia, where rolling hills soften into cultivated land and ancient paths still guide daily life, a quiet field holds one of Africa's most understated prehistoric landscapes. There are no temples here, no walls, no cities carved into stone. Instead, there are pillars, rising directly from carefully prepared ground. This is Taya. At first glance, the site appears simple. Dozens of stone stelae standing upright in open earth. Some are tall and narrow. Others are shorter, thicker, more weathered. Many bear carvings, symbols cut cleanly into stone centuries ago. But the true structure of Tia is not only vertical. It begins beneath the surface. Each stele stands on a prepared platform, a deliberately leveled base constructed to stabilize stone in soft soil. These platforms are subtle, low stone settings, compacted earth, and embedded supports. But without them, the stele would not stand for long. The builders understood this. They did not simply raise stones, they anchored them. Tia dates roughly between the 10th and 15th centuries CE, though its cultural roots may extend further back. The people who built these monuments left no written records. Their language, beliefs, and social organization are largely unknown, but their engineering remains visible. The stelae are carved from local stone, shaped into elongated forms with flattened faces. On many, symbols are etched: swords, geometric patterns, and abstract motifs whose meanings are still debated. These carvings are not decorative flourishes. They are deliberate markers. What makes Tia especially compelling is the consistency of placement. The stelae are arranged in groups, each stone aligned vertically with remarkable precision. They are not scattered randomly. Spacing is intentional. Orientation is repeated. This repetition suggests a shared system of knowledge. Raising a tall stone upright is not trivial. The deeper the stone is set, the more stable it becomes, but digging deep destabilizes surrounding soil. The builders solved this by creating compacted platforms that spread weight outward rather than downward. This is basic structural engineering, and it works. Many of the stelae at Tia remain standing after centuries of rainfall, soil movement, and environmental change. Those that have fallen often did so due to later disturbance, not structural failure. The platforms did their job. The function of the stelae themselves remains one of the great open questions. Many scholars interpret them as funerary markers, possibly commemorating warriors or individuals of status. The sword symbols reinforce this idea. But the platforms complicate a purely funerary interpretation. These were not quick grave markers. They required planning, preparation, and labor beyond what is necessary for simple burial. The platforms suggest permanence, an intention for the stones to stand for, generations. This points to memory. Tia appears to have been a place where identity was fixed into the land. Not through architecture you enter, but through markers you pass, vertical references that remain visible across seasons and years. The ground itself becomes the monument. What is striking is the restraint. There is no attempt to build upward beyond necessity. No walls enclosing the site. No central structure dominating others. Each stele stands independently, yet collectively they form a coherent landscape. This is decentralized monumentality. It reflects a social structure where meaning was shared rather than centralized. Each stone carries significance, but no single stone controls the space. The platforms reinforce this equality. Each is built to the same basic standard. No stele receives an elaborate base. No hierarchy is carved into the ground. That uniformity matters. It suggests that whatever the stele represented, ancestors, warriors, events, they were remembered within a shared framework rather than ranked dominance. The landscape of Tia is also telling. The site sits along ancient routes linking different regions of Ethiopia. Visibility is high. Anyone passing nearby would notice the stones. This makes Tia a statement, not a fortress, not a sanctuary hidden away, but a place meant to be seen and recognized. The builders understood that memory needs visibility. The platforms ensure stability, but the height ensures presence. Stone rises above crops, above grass, above time. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Tia stone stelae platforms stand as evidence that advanced spatial planning does not require cities or empires. It requires intention. These people knew how to stabilize stone. They knew how to prepare ground. They knew how to make memory last. Standing among the stelae today, the experience is quiet and deeply human. There is no spectacle. The stones do not overwhelm. They stand patiently, each one slightly different, each one rooted. The platforms beneath your feet are almost invisible, but once you notice them, everything changes. You realize that nothing here is accidental. The builders thought about soil, about rain, about time. They wanted these stones to remain, and they did. Tia reminds us that some of the most enduring prehistoric monuments were not defined by scale or complexity, but by understanding. Understanding of land, of material, and of what it means to be remembered. Stone does not remember on its own. People teach it how. And at Tia, they taught it well. Hegra, Madain. In the vast desert of northwestern Arabia, where rock and sand dominate the horizon and rainfall is both rare and unpredictable, there exists a city that mastered stone not only above ground, but beneath it. This is Hegra, known historically as Madain Saleh. At first glance, Hegra is defined by what rises from the cliffs. Monumental rock-cut tombs carved directly into sandstone faces, their facades still sharp after 2,000 years. These structures draw the eye immediately, but the true achievement of Hegra lies elsewhere. It lies underground. Beneath the desert surface, hidden from wind, sun, and casual observation, the Nabateans created a network of subterranean stoneworks that allowed life to exist where it should not have survived at all. This was not a city sustained by chance. It was sustained by engineering. Hegra flourished between the 1st century BCE and the 2nd century CE as a major Nabatean center along the incense trade routes. Caravans passed through carrying frankincense, myrrh, spices, and metals. But trade alone does not sustain a desert city. Water does. The Nabateans understood this better than almost any ancient culture. At Hegra, they carved an integrated underground system of cisterns, channels, wells, and settling basins, all cut into solid rock. These features captured seasonal rainfall, directed runoff, filtered sediment, and stored water safely below ground where evaporation could not steal it away. Stone here became infrastructure. Rainfall in this region is sudden and violent. When it comes, it arrives in short bursts, flooding wadis before disappearing again. The Nabateans studied this behavior carefully. Rather than resisting floods, they redirected them. Water was guided into channels carved into bedrock, sloped just enough to control speed without eroding stone. These channels fed underground cisterns sealed with plaster-like coatings that prevented seepage and contamination. This, a vertical system. Surface life supported by invisible stone beneath. This reflects a worldview that valued preparation over display. The tomb facades are elaborate, but they are symbolic. The underground works are practical, and far more difficult to execute. Carving a facade requires artistry. Carving a hydraulic system requires foresight. The Nabateans had both. Tool marks inside the channels reveal careful, methodical work. Walls are smoothed where water flows fastest. Corners are rounded to reduce turbulence. Sediment traps are positioned at natural collection points. This is fluid dynamics expressed through stone. No written manuals survive to explain how this knowledge was taught. But the consistency across Nabatean sites, Petra, Hegra, and others, suggests standardized training and shared technical traditions. Knowledge moved with people. The subterranean works also include burial chambers carved deep into rock, accessible only through narrow passages. These spaces were isolated from surface activity, reinforcing separation between daily life and the dead. Even here, stone was used to control environment, temperature, humidity, and stability. Nothing was accidental. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the subterranean stoneworks of Hegra remind us that some of the greatest achievements of ancient architecture were never meant to be seen. They were meant to function. Modern cities rely on buried systems. Water pipes, sewage, power lines, largely invisible until they fail. Hegra operated on the same principle 2,000 years ago. Build below, survive above. Standing in the desert today, it is easy to admire the carved facades and forget the complexity beneath your feet. But without the underground system, Hegra would have been uninhabitable. The city would have failed. Instead, it thrived. For generations, people drank water captured months earlier. Crops grew where none should. Caravans rested and moved on, confident that supplies awaited them. All because someone understood how stone could guide water, quietly, patiently, and precisely. Hegra teaches us that ancient intelligence was not always expressed through monuments that reach the sky. Sometimes it was expressed through channels carved into darkness, stone shaping flow, flow shaping survival, survival shaping civilization. And long after the caravan stopped and the city fell silent, the subterranean stoneworks remain, still cut cleanly into the rock, still capable of doing what they were designed to do: hold life in a place where life should not endure. That is the true legacy of Hegra.